Welcome to the CES session on Robotics to the Rescue. I'm Gene Demetri, Senior Editor at the Robot Report. Thank you to the Consumer Technology Association for having us today. I'll be joined by an expert panel with people with experience in ground robots, drones, connectivity, and processing. We'll start off with James Ryan Burgess, the CEO of Wing. James, welcome.
Thanks, Gene. Pleasure to be here. Well, Wing is a drone delivery company that is engineering small automated aircraft to help with the last mile delivery of urgently needed goods. And I actually have one of them with me here, so I'll point out a few things about it. But this is it, and it's pretty small and made mostly of foam. So it might be likened more to a remote control airplane. But inside is all the technology and capability to do this reliably and dependably in high scale. You can see we have multiple hover rotors like a traditional multi-rotor drone you'd be familiar with, but we also have wings that allow us to fly efficiently forward so we can go a long range using a little amount of battery to deliver goods in just minutes to people. And we're at the stage now as a company where we are not just proving the technology, but now we're trying to look at how can we integrate this into communities and do it safely and do it in a way that is appropriate and really desirable for the communities we're trying to serve. Wing operates in 4 cities around the world in 3 continents, and we're learning a tremendous amount about how to make this technology more suitable and useful for communities. I think as we'll talk about today, this year has been quite a challenge for all of us, and we're tremendously just enthusiastic to learn about how this technology can be even more useful and dependable in times like this. So looking forward to talking more about that today. Thank you.
Next is Ati Heinle, the CEO of Starship.
Hello, everybody. At Starship, we are also solving delivery problems with robotics, but differently than Wing does. So Wing does it in the air, we do it on the ground. So we are delivering lots of food and groceries to hundreds of thousands of people in many different locations, like 20 plus locations in the US and elsewhere. So we are not on a pilot level anymore. We are in full commercial service, and we are demonstrating every day with our thousands of deliveries that we have done every day that this service is really useful, especially in these times where people value contactless.
Thank you, Ati. And last but not least, we have Kathy Winter, the Vice President at the IoT Group at Intel.
Thanks, Gene. Thanks for having me. So what I do at Intel is run our autonomous transportation and infrastructure division. And, Intel's really focused on big problems. We like to think about what can we solve and how can we reshape the world, right? Make it an improved, safer place. And so when we think about it, technology is really enabling lots of new opportunities, not only in how we move, but we work, we live. So my team is very focused on basically making anything that moves autonomous, right? And you say, well, why would Intel be into that? And why does that fit our space? Well, one of the things that I think everything we're going to talk about today has in common is it generates a lot of data. When you have a lot of data, you have to figure out how to transmit it, secure it, store it, analyze it, et cetera. So that really fits right down the alley of, where we play, high performance compute, AI, computer vision, things like that. So I'm really excited to be here and get to hear more about Adi and James' opportunities as well as what we're doing at Intel.
Thank you, Kathy. And all 3 of you brought up points that are relevant to this discussion. That the title of our session is Robotics to the Rescue. And normally when you say something like that, you mean emergency response robots in disaster areas or stuff like that. But this year, our definition of what a frontline worker has changed. Our definition of how automation can help can change. Kathy, maybe you can speak to this point. In terms of robotics in new applications, what is the area in which you think that they're really serving in a way that was not possible or maybe not even envisioned a few years ago?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think for me, a lot of the use cases were actually envisioned, but this year's really accelerating them. So I think, people have been thinking about, well, you could use a robot for anything that's dirty or dangerous that you don't want to get involved with, or you don't want a human. But I think that whole category is really expanded now, right? When you start to think about sanitizing either factories for workers to come back, or hospitals, or things like that. So to me, I'll even go all the way to an automated vehicle, for example. You might not have minded getting in a robo-taxi or a taxi that was driven by someone, but the need to have one that maybe has been sanitized and there's no strange driver in there has accelerated, right? So I'll even go as far as automated vehicles as well.
And maybe to that point, Ati, you mentioned contactless. How has that become something that is a priority now?
Absolutely, people value nowadays the opportunity to have things delivered to them in a contactless manner, and also with the changes in this world this year, we have seen our volumes triple, and there's just so much more interest, and this is very, very relevant for us because, you know, as I said, we are not in a pilot phase. We are making money. We are after revenue. We are after volumes, and this is really good for us, and we love to see that we can help the communities to do things in a better way, and overall, definitely, like there was talk here about what people expected, you know, from the future. There's a lot of expectations, of course, that in the world, robotics and other innovations will make all things so much better, and all of these flying cars and things will come. But we are all demonstrating here that this future is actually right now. That we can do these deliveries, you know, with both the ground robots and flying robots today, and the connectivity is also there.
Well, and speaking of flying deliveries, James, how has the economics been changing? Because obviously, again, there's this acceleration of demand. There is this new awareness of how autonomous systems of all kinds can really help provide value. How has that helped Wing?
Yeah, I think, you know, even Ati was just mentioning they're seeing a huge increase this year, and Wing also has seen a huge spike. We had a 6x increase at the start of this year from our services before and after the quarantine lockdowns. And I think that economics is one key aspect. Certainly the contactless element helps, but also looking at how we do things today. To be honest, we're using technologies that have been around for quite a long time. You take automobiles and heavy trucks, there's a lot of cost in that. And even to move small items, urgently needed goods, or a meal, or whatever it happens to be, using that mechanism for transport just doesn't make sense. It's inefficient. It's, you know, producing a lot of carbon. And what we see today is the demand is increasing. The trends already from the past few years are just accelerating now this year. But the economics make it quite challenging. Many people don't know, but merchants actually subsidize a lot of the delivery costs for orders that consumers make, in addition to the $5 or $6 fee that consumers pay. And so using automated robotics, we think, actually provides such a great potential for stripping costs out of that last mile of delivery. And that makes it accessible not just to more consumers and more users, but it also invites merchants and businesses to participate even more as well, so they can take advantage of that. So especially when you can fly through the air and avoid congestion and other delays, we think air robots and the ground robots that Ati is working on really make an economic case to see them really scale and advance for years to come.
Yeah, I was going to jump in on that one too, and just build on the topic of scalability, because I think you're absolutely right. At the low end, the tiniest, whether it's one of your drones, all the way up to, do you need to be moving people, right? And so scalability from a technology perspective, we don't want to keep reinventing at every level something completely different for an AMR, for example, on the ground versus an automated vehicle. And I think they all have to plan, they all have to sense, they all have to act. So I do think there's elements that can scale across what all of us are doing here today.
Yeah, Gene, I don't want to interrupt some of your next questions, but Kathy, that's a great point. And you know, one of the things Wing looks at is how does the world see this technology? And I think some of the points implied in what you're saying is, you know, this drone behind me, actually the engineering cycles and the design, it's more like consumer electronics, to be honest, or ground robots even, than it is like a traditional airplane. And that's some of the challenge we face is, how do you take sort of a definition or a term like aviation, but apply it to something that's engineered and the technology behind it is much more like these rapid digital devices we're seeing more and more of these days. So it's a neat paradigm shift that I think we're not all the way through yet, but that's definitely going to lead to unlocking like more of this.
Right, great answers here, and I also second that. The word economics was mentioned here, and that definitely that is the case. Like, why do we here in this robotics panel have two people who are solving delivery problems? Like, why is that? We're talking about robots. We're not talking about delivery per se, but we have two people in this panel talking about delivery. Guess what? Delivery is actually the largest unautomated industry in the world. It's actually the pretty much the last place in this world where a single person, like a courier, is handling something specifically for you for 20 minutes or whatever it takes. That's why both me and James here are automating delivery. And from the consumer's perspective, delivery today kind of works. I mean, yes, you pay a couple of bucks and you get what you want, or maybe you don't pay these couple of bucks at all. It kind of appears to be free. Well, guess what? It isn't free. And while it might be working for the consumer, it isn't always working for the company doing the delivery. So they are looking for solutions, and we are providing these solutions.
I get asked a lot about, are you putting people out of business? Are you taking away jobs? Especially when we talk about automated vehicles, right? But same in your space. And I keep telling everyone, if you look at the stats, there's a shortage of drivers. And you look at the exponential growth we've even seen this year in this space of logistics and delivery, there aren't enough drivers in the world. And so you are actually solving a problem there as well, right? It's more efficient, it's productive, and there's all kinds of new opportunities technology is bringing for work opportunities, retrain the workforce. There's going to be ample opportunities. So I don't see this as cutting into that employment space. It instead enhances it.
Well, we talked about the economic opportunity, which is large and obvious and growing, but there are obviously technical and other types of challenges. On the technical side, how difficult is it to develop the fleet management that's required? Because you're talking about the operations of autonomous vehicles or ground robots or delivery drones, and you're talking eventually fleets of these things out in the world. How much work is still going on in that? And maybe for our audience, how mature is that right now?
Yeah, Kathy mentioned actually about data, and I think that's one of the key elements here is there's just so much to keep track of, both the individual robots or airplanes as you have, but also the environment, the weather, the traffic, the other systems they're moving through. And for Wing, that's one of our challenges. I'd love to hear from Kathy and Ati as well, but we actually have had to engineer a platform to manage the fleets of aircraft we have. In the industry now, it's called UTM, Unmanned Traffic Management. But the idea is to take the mechanisms of air traffic control, the principles of safety and separation and ensuring no conflicts, but transit those from the way it's done today in the world for manned aircraft and actually build it on the cloud and build it scalably and make it a federated network so there can be multiple providers, multiple data sources, multiple processors of that information, and make sure that the skies, in this case, stay open and free for everyone to access. So it's a tremendously big challenge, to be honest, and it calls into question a lot of how we think about air traffic. But like you're pointing out, Gene, that has to be solved for us to exist at scale, and it's one of the things that we're excited to be working on.
Okay.
Yeah, sure. So I'll go to both extremes. One extreme is the automated vehicle, and today with 5G coverage, we can't really depend on that car always being connected. So they're very self-contained, right, from the perspective of all their sensors and their data. And right now, what we try to do is limit the amount of data you actually have to get off that vehicle to take it up to the cloud. So it's very self-contained. Once there's more 5G pervasive around the globe, I think it definitely enhances the experience, and you can start to think of the different media that can be delivered, the different use cases for data coming off the vehicles. But right now, they're completely standalone and don't have to have that. But when I think of an AMR or inside a factory, for example, then it starts to become a lot more relevant, right? Because now you're wanting to manage them all over your factory floor, and that back-end system plays a much bigger role than it does with the automated vehicles today.
And Ati, you already have fleets of vehicles, technically.
Right, and we just like James mentioned, we also had to build a lot of it ourselves because there just isn't, a good, solution available that is, off the shelf and actually tested in the scale that we are at. And, because like Starship is actually, I think, the out of robotics companies that are operating in the public space, it's just the largest in the world, and by the operation, by far. And it's very complicated what we are doing. Like, I'm sure, James can also say the exact same thing about Wing. I'm sure it's very complicated. It has multi layers. Like, you need to build hardware, you need to be building software, you need to think about regulations, you need to think about safety. You need to have like a safety team in house. You need to talk about, think about consumer adoption and value proposition. And yes, you need also to build an app, right? But there are actually, it's possible to also create startups and companies and so forth by just building an app. It's much simpler. But we are doing something actually quite complicated. But we are also, by doing so, we're actually creating something that changes the world.
Well, and all three of you have mentioned regulations that as a constraint or as something that is challenging, whether we're talking beyond visual line of sight for Wing, or we're talking about traffic regulations for autonomous vehicles, or standards for safety on sidewalks for Starship. How is that evolving? Are you finding, each of you finding that it's having to come from industry? Are you finding that government is catching on, or is it something where there's a mutual education going on?
Yeah, I think mutual education. Go ahead, Kathy.
Well, I was just going to say, I think particularly in the automated vehicle space, this is definitely further behind than the technology itself, because you see cars out there. We know how to make them drive. But the regulatory piece, I think the part where it's getting really interesting is today you go and you get a driver's license, right? So I get certified as a driver, your 16-year-olds get certified, you pass a test. So I think the big challenge now is you're not certifying a driver because there's not a driver anymore, right? So how do we all agree to certify an automated vehicle that's safe to be on the road? And the one thing you don't want to have happen is you don't want to differentiate different vehicles or trucks because one's safer than another in the automated vehicle space. You want safety to be a given, right? And a standard across all of them. So we are spending a lot of time out in the industry and out in the states and at the federal level trying to influence that we need to get a safety standard in place that everybody can agree is the best that's out there today. And we'll keep learning and revising it over time. But we know for sure that an automated vehicle is much more safe than a person, a human. When you think of the number of fatalities a year, it's staggering. And we don't get, the car doesn't get distracted and it doesn't age. It doesn't have all of those things. So I think this is probably one of the gating factors right now for sure in the AV space.
Yeah, we would agree in the aviation space as well. Kathy, you mentioned standards. I think that's a key point. Gene, it really does take industry coming together to show what's possible. And I think there is education both ways. Wing has had to learn a lot about aviation regulations, working with regulators around the world. But we've also had to teach about what the technology is capable of, and to Kathy's point, how to make it standardized and have these bars that are actually appropriately high for safety and performance to ensure that this is adding value to communities and not taking it away. But I'll give you some examples. Like, there's some challenges. The regulations are written in a way that they're fairly prescriptive for manned aviation. So like, you have to have seatbelts and you have to have a flight manual on board the aircraft. And for Wing, obviously those don't really apply when you think about it, but we still need a way around those regulations. So there's a lot of trying to find mechanisms through to change the wording or write exemptions. And at the end of the day, regulators see the value and they want to see this technology move forward. But it's a challenge to do so as fast as the technology is coming about and being developed. Ati was talking about the fleet management systems and the complication. Another example is typically you think about a pilot is the one who starts a flight. Pilot gets in the cockpit, throttles up the engines, they're making the decisions. And in Wing's case, it's actually the user, the recipient of a package who starts the flight. They say on their phone, I need something delivered at my address or my backyard or in the park. And then that cues this whole series of software steps that then initiate the flight to go serve them. And just even that regime of thinking about who's starting this action challenges the regulatory frameworks we have today. So we have good partnerships with regulators and they are making progress, and it is a joint effort, but it is an honest challenge to move as fast as we think the technology can be available to serve people.
Yeah, I also see that it's definitely mutual education that is going on, and both sides are benefiting. It's clear, of course, that everybody who does anything with robotics in public spaces, they definitely do face the question that are your robots safe? How can we be sure as regulators? How can we be sure that we are allowing something in the public spaces that is not causing any harm to people? And that is, of course, a super fair question, and it's a question that is harder to answer if you're just starting out. But once you have driven or flown with your robots, like 1 million miles, like we have, it's become just a lot easier to answer, because everybody can just see that, okay, 1 million miles, but nothing has really happened. And over time, there is definitely more understanding going on how to regulate these things. And also on the other side, the companies that are building robots, they also learn how to think about safety. So I started Starship as a startup 6 years ago, and we were 2 guys on the whiteboard, right? And on this whiteboard, the first back of the napkin calculations that we did were about economics and unit economics, and we thought about okay, we need to solve safety, but we didn't necessarily know immediately how to do that. But we had to learn about that. We had to learn about how to build a safety team, safety analysis, how to annotate whatever stuff happens, in the real world. Is that dangerous? Is that not dangerous? How to calculate danger scores? How to think about these things? What data to record about the incidents, and so forth and so forth. So it has been a lot of learning, also about certification and various different things. It's an interesting and complicated world, but when you finally solve it, you actually deliver great value to the world.
Well, we've looked at the technology as it's evolving. We touched on the regulatory challenges. The competitive landscape is also evolving as awareness, as you mentioned, Ati, from user companies has been increasing and demand has accelerated, partially because of the pandemic. There's a lot of companies entering each of your spaces now. And they may not have the advantage of the experience that you have, but they see this need and they're rushing to solve it. How do each of you see that changing in the coming year, especially internationally?
I don't actually changing all that much, and for the reason that yes, there are a lot of companies sort of entering the space, but there is a very big difference between developing your first prototype or your first mock-up of a drone or robot and taking a picture of it or making a YouTube video and actually operating something at scale safely and having solved all of these problems. Like you could here have a completely different guy, not named James but named somebody else, and also have a drone, like a pretty much similar looking drone, like James has, on this picture, and telling also that, hey, we're doing drone deliveries and so forth. But while they do have something that looks like a drone, they do not have the level of experience, the level of maturity in all of this as James has. And the same is for our Starship. So I think we are still the leading companies in our fields and will remain so.
And I would add, go ahead, Kenny.
Good. Well, I was just going to mention, we use the word safety a lot in the previous conversation, and I think that right now, the technology is there, but doing it in a safe way. Back to these use cases and the safety analysis that needs to be done on these platforms, it really does take some high level of expertise. So if you don't have it yourself, you certainly have to have a great partner that really understands that. And I think that cuts across all 3 of our spaces. It looks easier than it is. And, I think it is an aggressive crowd out there because everyone sees this as kind of a shiny new space to get into, but there's a learning curve there for sure.
And I'll add too, Gene, I think the competition aspect is interesting, at least for where Wing is in the aviation space. Because on one hand, the market is so large. Honestly, Ati was referencing it about the delivery market being ripe for automation and all the use cases today we know about, not to mention all the ones to come in the future that we're still learning about, and I think society will invent and come up with. But for us, we're trying to get this whole industry off the ground. You don't see drone delivery widespread, nationally or internationally, because it's still needing to prove itself. The regulations still need to take shape. And to be honest, we think the more players actually that exist help push that forward. So today, it's more cooperation is beneficial than competition is beneficial. And I'm sure that will change over the coming years. But right now, we're in a race to have an industry at all versus who's trying to capture the bigger share of it. So for us,
that's a really good point. And I think it's also true when you think of the robotaxis. I mean, there's not going to be one dominant player. There's going to be key players in all different regions of the world. So, I do see a lot of really creative partnerships out there as people try to co-invest, because it is a heavy lift technology-wise. And then I'll also bring up the non-logistics piece. But, when I think about the industrial applications, right, or the medical applications for these AMRs to be delivering everything from medicine to stockpiles of goods to factory floor spaces that need additional material. There are so many different use cases and applications. I mean, there was one estimate, there's like 8 million robots expected to be out there by, I think, end of 2030, and 6 million of them will be moving and autonomous. So, I mean, it's such a massive opportunity for everyone that, I think I would agree, accelerating the market and getting people to trust and to get the legislation in place and the liability potential under control, to me, that works in everybody's favor. Safer world in general.
Well, and that brings me, I guess, to our closing question is, we talk about robotics to the rescue, and certainly this has been a year of many challenges, a year of inflection points, all in many, many different ways. But in the autonomous systems space, which all three of you are in, can you give me an example of briefly what consumers can look forward to in the coming year? Because 2021, this is a year that will have new challenges, but maybe new successes. Kathy.
Sure. I would say you're going to see a lot more touchless experience in general, whether it's in your vehicle, whether it's robots running around, or screening at the airport. So I think that trend is going to continue on into 2021, and it's really been accelerated. So think of it as a touchless experience. I think that's going to be it.
Ani.
I would say what the world is going to see that a lot of these companies that are now operating at a smaller scale, they will grow up and become big businesses. And people used to think about robots as something like, oh, it's a gimmick, or it's not something like really useful. It looks better than it is, but they actually come to realize that this change in the world comes much quicker than they thought, because these services are actually existing and actually work fine. It's just that they haven't used them yet.
Right.
James.
Yeah, I think so much we tend to focus on examples we know of today, like how robotics and automation can make things cheaper or faster, and that's true, and there's a lot of benefits. But I'd like to think about what we unlock in the future that's different than what we have today. One example is in Helsinki, where we're operating, we deliver to public parks. So people can have a picnic or get some medicine or things they might need while they're out and about. We're no longer tied to an address. We had one example in Virginia where a librarian came to us and said, we'd like to deliver library books to kids who are stuck at home for the summer. Can you deliver books by drone? We said, sure, we never thought about doing that, but of course we can. And I like to think about all the potential that comes with this new technology to have us actually live different and better lives than we do today. A final thing is transportation is such an emissions producer. I think these electronic devices like wings or Autis as well, I think they can make a huge dent in some of our environmental goals as well. So I think there's a lot of promise and a lot of potential to be had.
Well, and I can't wait to see where this will all evolve in the coming months and year. Thank you again to our speakers, James Ryan Burgess, CEO at Wing, Ati Heinle, CEO at Starship, and Kathy Winter, Vice President of the IoT Group at Intel. I'm Gene Demetri, Senior Editor at The Robot Report.
CES. Welcome back. A special welcome. What?
I was waving at everybody.
Oh, I didn't know why you were laughing.
I was like, hi.
A special welcome for those waking up with us. Actually.
Well, that was sure exciting. I definitely hope you got as much out of that as I did. It sounds like 2021 is going to be very exciting in the robotics and automation space. So yeah, I would say let's keep an eye on it. And it's all of our jobs to educate. It's all of our jobs to inform. And I hope this helped you understand where automation and robotics are going in 2021. And we'll catch you next time. Bye now.